Hi everybody.
Hi there. Good to have you with us again. So at DBC, we're in the middle of a preaching series about the Book of Mark. I think if it was part of a book club or if it was on sale at some shop, they'd have a big sign up that says, bestseller. It's been read all over the world. It's the first biography of the most important person who's ever lived on earth, which is, of course, Jesus. And it had been translated all over the world. So whether they're in the jungles of Asia or Africa, or whether in the Arctic wastes at the poles, they would have been able to read it. And during that 2,000 years, it had been read in the great palaces of the medieval kings through to the poorest of the poor. And it's had such a change to millions of people's lives.
In this series of 3 talks, we're not talking about the book of Mark, but instead about the person, Mark, the writer of Mark. Some of the comments will come from the Bible, and some from traditionally held views, and some will simply be us playing Miss Marple and suggesting possibilities of what we've guessed at.
Or Hercule Poirot.
Or Poirot. So, without any further introduction, let us introduce you to the main characters in this story.
So first of all, on the green, we have our writer. He is sometimes referred to as John, which is his Hebrew name. But as there seem to be lots of Johns around, he's more generally known by either his Greek or his Roman name, Mark. And as we go through, we'll learn a lot more about him.
So next we have Barnabas. He's Mark's cousin, who seemed to be fairly rich, and he sold some of the land where he lived in Cyprus before joining other believers in Jerusalem. He became one of the first evangelists to take the good news of Jesus to other places.
Then in the browny orange, we have Paul. He is obviously of Damascus Road fame, and he was another of the first evangelists to take the good news of Jesus to other places.
And finally, we have Peter, one of the special 12 followers of Jesus during his 3.5 years of ministry, and later someone who became one of the leaders of the early church. So as well as using a map to tell his story, we'll also be showing his timeline to see how the story progresses. The story covers a 40-year period in the middle of the 1st century, from AD 30, at the time of the first Easter, through to AD 68, when Mark died. For reasons we'll explain later, we're going to work on the basis of Mark being a teenager of about 15 at the start of this timeline in AD 30, and so aged 53 when he died. We'll see him aged 15, following Jesus, then aged 45, writing the book of Mark, and then aged 53 when he died.
But today, we're going to focus on the middle part of his story. Next time, the early part, and then in our third talk, the latter part. So today, we'll see him in his mid-30s. First of all, assisting Paul and Barnabas, and then evangelizing himself. So let's get our map of Eastern Mediterranean and our characters and look at where Mark was in his early 30s.
So briefly, Mark grew up in Jerusalem, but in his late 20s, he went with Paul and Barnabas to Antioch. So in AD 46, in his early 30s, he's the assistant to Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary trip. So in AD 46, in his early 30s, Mark is the assistant to Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary trip, which was back to Barnabas's home island of Cyprus. But when they travelled onto the mainland, which is now Turkey, Mark left them and went back to Jerusalem.
Then a few years later, when Paul and Barnabas were looking to do a second missionary trip, Barnabas wanted to take Mark with them again from Antioch. But Paul didn't want to take him because they considered that Mark had deserted them on their first trip. And it says that a sharp disagreement blew up, resulting in Paul taking Silas. And I guess for Mark, that must have been like a body blow, a real pow, from that sense of rejection from Paul. But Barnabas still took Mark with him, and they returned to Cyprus. And I guess there must have felt a real exhilaration, a real yeah, because he then was back on the field again, and he was an evangelist. And indeed, later he became known as Mark, the Evangelist.
The comment from Paul has always come over as Mark being a bad guy, deserting the work. However, if you note that Mark went back to see his family in Jerusalem, perhaps we ought to cut him a bit of slack. In some ways, you may think that Paul really had it in for him, but from comments in Paul's letters, we see that Paul and Mark had made up and worked alongside each other when they were both in Rome.
And something we just want to highlight from this story, which seems to be important of the impact on Mark, is the actions of Barnabas. For Barnabas effectively says, come on, I will give you a second chance. So just think about this. If Barnabas had not given Mark a second chance, it would have changed all of Mark's future life. And that would have resulted in Mark not being in Jerusalem and not being in Rome, writing the book of the biography of Jesus, a book that has changed the life of millions.
So from Mark being given a second chance, two things to think about. So firstly, is there anyone who's let you down? And in some way you're holding it against them? And is it time for you, like Barnabas did for Mark, to give that person a second chance? Who can tell what releasing them from your negative mindset would release for them and for Jesus in the kingdom's future?
And so the second thing to think about is perhaps you are the one who've been given a second chance by Jesus. In the past you'd messed up, but now you're back walking in harmony with him. He's given you a second chance, and now it's the time to take it and to do everything that he planned for you to do, just like Mark did, with such amazing consequences. So take that second chance. Don't waste it.
So next time, we'll be looking at the earlier part of Mark's life, before he set out on these missionary journeys.
So bye for now.
Thank you for being with us. Bye.